Good morning, dearest friends. Thank you for being here. Today is Wednesday, the 17th of Shvat, 19th of January, I believe. And we're gathered to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time at the moment. Masechet Shabbos, chapter 11, 98b. We've just concluded several days of describing the dimensions, the layout, the style of the wagons that were used to transport the beams of the Mishkan. The beams themselves with varying viewpoints on how they were styled, how they were designed. We even considered the design and the style of the corner beams, which if it was only sloping on one side would have been awkward no matter how you slice it. And we concluded that maybe it was shaved on both ends to have a flush, neat look. Yesterday, we went on to analyze the psukim that describe the covering of the Mishkan, the actual tent material. And we discovered or reviewed that there were actually two different layers, a lower layer, a higher layer. The lower layer was comprised of 10 sheets, which were each 4 amot wide and 28 amot long. And we workshopped exactly how it interplayed with the frame of the Mishkan, how far it draped down on the sides, how long the roof was. And we uncovered that depending on how thick the frame, the karushim, the beams were, that might interfere or create an important distinction on exactly how low down the drapes fell on the exterior of the Mishkan. So again, the lower layer, 28 by 40, the higher layer, 30 by 44. And both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia, depending on the thickness, had different perspectives on exactly how it draped down. Yesterday, we closed off our discussion by noting, and the Torah actually notes this, that there was the Serach HaOdef, there was a remainder on the western side that draped down 2 amot. Rabbi Yehuda would say they literally draped on the ground. Rabbi Nechemia would simply say that the higher material draped 2 amot further than the lower layer. Before we jump into the Gemara and go on to the next discussion, which will be a little bit of a recap, I want to share the screen and share with you here just a cutaway of what it might have looked like. No one ever saw this because you didn't get to see a cutaway or whatever it was of the Mishkan, but here we get to see the beams. According to Rabbi Yehuda, they were angular. The lower drapes came down 9 amot, as you can see over here. The outer layer came down an additional amma all the way to the ground. This is according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Nechemia, for some reason, they don't include Rabbi Nechemia's the portrayal of, here, Rabbi Nechemia. Here, the lower layer, 9 ammas came down. Only 8 ammas came down. And so part of the wood, part of the sockets were exposed, and the outer layer of the additional amma. So just so we can visualize how it might have been, and to recall that the thickness of this area has an important influence on how far down the material drapes at the bottom. Just to take a look at our closing segment. I thought they gave us a picture, bear with me. Here. We talk about the extra 2 amot, according to Rabbi Yehuda, they draped over here. According to Rabbi Nechemia, it was only 1 amma on the ground, but it was 2 ammas. And our Gemara made a comment that there is a style for women's garments to occasionally have a billowing and draping, I don't know what the word is, where it comes down behind a train. Is that what we call it? Anyways, and so that is what the Gemara notes, that it kind of had that portrayal. I'm not finding in the commentaries a specific explanation, so I'm inclined to believe this is more a description than an explanation.
So let me ask you a question.
Yes.
So let me ask you a question. So as far as the surplus, the orders, was the length and the width always have to be exactly the same, or did they make it longer because in case the edges fray or shrink because of differences of rain, it's leather and could theoretically shrink a little bit, and or fray at the edges, and that you may have to cut a little bit. So that's why maybe they made it a little extra long, So it would always cover the actual Mishkan.
You make a good point. I'm not inclined to believe that's the reason, though. But it is an interesting. I mean, when I say I'm not inclined, I haven't heard that it has to do with the fraying of the material, because I suppose if it starts fraying, it could fray on all the corners, and it would probably need to be replaced. But the Torah explicitly references it. You know what we could do? Just bear with me one more moment, Rebel. Here, while I look it up, if you'll go ahead, please.
Rabbi,
Yes.
just a practical question. If the difference to the ground is so important, 1 amos, 2 amos, as they were moving it, that distance would change.
You're imposing a few things. First of all, when we say it's so important because that is the biblical prescription. And I want to remind you again, the Mishkan never moved while it was assembled. They didn't have wheels on the Mishkan. It didn't move while it was assembled. For it to be moved, it would have to be disassembled. And
No,
so again,
let's say from a wind or whatever, it's cloth. It's not something solid.
okay. I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. So therefore what? Therefore it had to
There could be times when the distance might be 3 amos from the wind.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
Okay, let it go.
What he's saying is the wind could displace the
Oh, you're
sheet.
saying that the material could
It would
shift.
up
It would be
or
like a
down,
table,
it could shift and it wouldn't cover the
like a
full-
tablecloth might shift on a table or
Yeah,
something like that.
right.
Well, we'll see
or
soon.
the wind would shift, yeah.
Okay,
So
I'm sorry.
that's what
Okay, I hear you. I believe it was fastened so that it wouldn't actually have the ability to shift so much, but it is an interesting point. I'm sorry I didn't understand that. I'm just looking for one verse.
You had the krasim,
Yeah, we're gonna get there. We're not up to there yet. We're gonna get there soon. First, I'm looking for the verse that mentions the Serach HaOdef, but hold on. Here. 26:12, is that it? Bear with me. Oh, here. The Serach HaOdef b'yirat ha'oil, chatzi eri odef et tisrach ha'lachor ha'mishkan v'ama mizeh v'amizeh v'odef v'arach yirat ha'oil. So it references the remainder, and we're asking what the value of this remainder was. I'm just looking to see if the commentaries give us any. All right, I don't know. I guess we'll see if there's any further insight provided by the Gemara.
Rabbi,
But anyways, yes, doctor.
just to crazy speculation, if the covering, the drapery goes down further, okay, and this was stimulated by Rev Beryl's question about the wind. So we're talking about sand on a desert, okay, and we're talking about sand that can be blown by the wind and then could go underneath if it doesn't go closer to the ground and be lifted up and quote schmutzig, make it dirty, something wholly dirty. So maybe that's a consideration.
Interesting. So you're saying maybe the addition was to prevent sand from infiltrating the Mishkan.
Right.
Interesting. Interesting. Very interesting. Now what we really need to do, we're not going to do now, is go back to the Chumash in Truma and go from the beginning and play by play and portray and explain. And then, this will add a lot of information. Again, Rashi distilled some of this in his commentary, but that is a good point and we'll have to revisit it. Okay, now we're going to do something that we actually already saw the pictures for, and we'll revisit them. Tana Rabban. our sages taught. Again, we're right now on the cusp of 99a, which means we're one page away from 100, which is big stuff, big news. Of course, Mark will remind us that we're not really on the 100th page. We're really getting on the 98th, on the 97th, turning to the 98th, because the Sharblat, the first page, does not have much action on it. That is a fair point. Tanu Rabbanan, Charutzim Hayu Krashim. The beams had protruding grooves. V'chalulim Hayu Adanim. Whereas the sockets were hollow. And so they plugged in, not very unlike the way our outlets, electric outlets and sockets might be portrayed. Actually, no, I'm in the wrong here. Let's go to the top. Again, nothing major, nothing that's massively unfathomable, but here we have the way that they chiseled out these protruding plugs, and the Adonim had receptacles to receive the plugs. And as we'll see, each keresh had 2 plugs, and they had 2 brackets to receive them. Charutzim hayu krashim v'chalulim hayu Adonim. Rashi, Kamoisha pirashti. Here, Rashi gives us some of the dimensions. I wouldn't go through it, but now that we have the pictures, it'll be helpful. Chatzi ama be'emsa, rachvan milmata begoiva ama. They're the width of an amma, and halfway through, nisharim hayadis lekano lekan, and you have on each side one of the little protruding prongs. V'gam charutzim mebachutz, and they are carved out, etched out from the exterior. Kishir oivi doifin oiden, to shtim, to fit with the width of the socket, with the size of an amma. Basically, each bracket, each socket flushly received the keresh. If you want to see Rashi's explanation in English, maybe we'll do that. The bottom of the crushim were chiseled out 1/4 of an amma all around, with a 1/2 an amma space in the middle, creating 2, here he uses tenons or pegs, which were 1/2 an amma by 1/4 amma each, and the height of 1 amma. So again, what we read in Rashi, 1 amma by 1/2 an amma by 1/4 amma. And basically this explains how we have 1/2 an amma and 1/4 of an amma and 1/4 of an amma, which equals 1 full amma this way. No, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's a 1/2 an amma, 1/2 an amma, and additional amma. So scratch that again. 1/4 of an amma, 1/4 amma is 1/2 an amma.
1/4 is a 1/2. Another 1/2 is a 1. Another
It's
1/4.
a whole, and then okay, 1 1/2. Okay, yes. I think. All right. Oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, 1/2 an amma this way. Yeah. All right. Yeah, it's 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, and then 1/2. I'm sorry. So it's 1 1/2. I was reading this and okay. So again, 1/4 of space until the plug. The plug itself was 1/4. That's 1/2. In between was another 1/2, and then 1/4 and 1/4, equaling 1 1/2 across. And the Adonim were exactly half of this. So 1/4, 1/2 and 1/4, perfectly fitting and matching the plug. And again, these pictures are fantastic. Chalulim hayu ha'adonim. It was hollow to receive exactly the beams. The Gemara continues. V'nirin krasim bilulaot kekochavim barakia. The clasps that were used to fuse the sheets of material that were the cover of the Mishkan were like stars in the sky. What does it mean to say? Rashi miltachriti shtei mechubarot hayu hayri kol achad v'achad hayriot tfurim zeh b'machat. 5 materials were stitched together, but in the middle they were connected with clasps, and those clasps were quite a display. And in case you'd like to imagine what that might have looked like, here you go: 5 sheets with special pretty clasps fusing the 2 sheets together. And I suppose what we're saying is, if you looked up to the roof of the Mishkan, because again, this is the under material, you actually saw a line of pretty colorful light. Mark, give me the right word.
Golden,
Reflecting, Yeah, but I'm saying they were gold, but they reflected the night sky, and
They
so
sparkled. They probably sparkled.
they sparkled. Yes, each
How can
spread
they,
had
re-
50.
how can they reflect the night sky if they're they're on the inside?
That they reflect the night sky. They portrayed. It gave you a sense of as if they were stars. You couldn't actually see the night sky, but sunlight could trickle through. So again, here for more information, each spread had 50 loops, which were made out of blue wool with golden hooks. And so the interplay of the gold and the blue created a blue with a twinkling appearance like the night sky. That's how this sheet explains it. Let us continue in the Gemara for a moment. And we're going to refer back to this sheet a bunch because it's a wonderful, colorful resource, and we'll make the best of it. Taner Rabbanan, our sages taught. Yurio tatachtono shel tchelet, the lower material, the underlayer, which you saw from the inside. Shel tchelet, v'shel agaman, v'shel tolashani, v'shel sheish, was made of blue wool, purple wool, scarlet wool, and sheish, which is fine linen. So the bottom layer was dyed wool, regular wool with different colors. V'ha elyonot shel maseh izim, and there was a unique, the outer layer, the longer layer, the layer that hung over from the exterior that was visible from the outside was made of goat's hair. Goat's hair is usually not a common material, or at least not as common as regular sheep's wool. The outer layer made of goat's hair was a greater feat of greater talent, a greater art. The lower layer, it says, it says that all the wise women who were chachmat leiv, and Rebberal, we will refer to your comment yesterday about chachmas leiv versus brain intellect. Biyadeh tavu, they wove it with their hands. The outer layer, it says, those whose hearts were truly uplifted with wisdom. Tavu esa'izim, they wove. Is that Bill? Hey, Bill, welcome. So I'm giving a class now, but if you'll wait for me a little bit, okay? Because I told you we had from 9 to 10 and then from 11 to 12. But I'll try if you don't mind sticking around. I want to get these to you.
Oh yeah,
Thank you, sir.
did we set a specific time?
Well, we said between 9 and 10 or after 11, but stick around. Don't go anywhere. Thank you, Bill. All right, folks, pardon me. So basically, we have two layers of curtains. Actually, Shalom Bear, if you would like, don't let Bill leave until I get to speak to him. But this is a pair, pardon me, folks, for saying, this is a pair of tefillin that is his. Maybe ask him if you could put it on and get to know them. All right, sorry, folks. And so the higher layer, the outer layer made of goat hair was a greater feat and a more challenging art. Ironically, what happened was the hair was rinsed while on the goat and spun and fashioned while still upon the goat. Let's take a look at the images. So first of all, if you're wondering what those colors look like, I'm going to go on a limb and say it didn't look exactly these shades, but it was approximately those shades, because I'm not sure if Tcheles was precisely that shade of blue, but it was blue. Argaman is the purple, Shani was crimson or a reddish variation, and then Sheish was white. So you can imagine that the different threads were these strong, vibrant colors. And in case you're wondering what it might look like, they cleaned the goat and they processed the hair on the goat. And folks, I don't know how they did it, but it was not an easy thing to do. That's pretty obvious. And so that's the chiddush. That's what the Gemara is telling us. The word, let's just take a look at the two psukim. The first verse says, every wise-hearted woman spun with her hands. Every wise woman. The later pasuk says, all the women whose hearts inspire them. So we're talking about a higher degree of insight and wisdom. So obviously it's harder to spin and weave material while it is still attached to the animal. Why they would want to do that? I guess because it was a pretty cool and unusual, I didn't say cruel, I said cool, but I hear why you might ask that too, to be able to do that. And suffice it to say, Azoi is us. That's how it was. I don't know exactly why that's how it was. My dear friends, we've now concluded. We're closing the door. We're finishing a long unit, discussing the wagons. We're not going to be entirely done with the wagons. We're talking about the crushim and their design, and the sockets, and the yiriot, the material that was actually the root, the tent, both the lower layer, the upper layer, the clasps, the dimensions, how far down they came. And again, pointing out once again, depending on the thickness of the crushim, might have some weight and influence on how low down the drapes came. And now we can close one door and open another, because we're going to zoom back to the Mishnah itself that we studied long ago. Here is the Mishnah. So our Mishnah describes, pardon me. Okay, so actually in the Gemara, it's one long Mishnah. But here, the Gemara describes Ketzad Shtei Gizu Turaot Zu Keneged Zu B'Reshut Harabim, two opposite balconies. And the Gemara then describes how they existed in the Mishkan with wagons, etc. The Gemara is going to give us some commentary, not too much, and it's going to be somewhat familiar. Amar Rav Mishum Rabbi Chia. Rav taught in the name of his uncle and teacher, Rabbi Chia. Agalot, this is familiar because we quoted this not long. The wagons, tachtehen, the space underneath them, uveinehem, and in between the different wagons, vitzidehem, and the side area, which was, I guess, where the wheels were and the like, rishus harabim, all around the wagon was considered a rishus harabim. Let's take a look at Rashi, if we can pull it back up. Bein agalala agalasha betzida he amas, because remember there was a 5 amma gap between one wagon and the neighboring wagon. Kimelo orech agala, like the size of the wagon. So you had a wagon, and then you had a whole wagon space distance. Lamali orech agala he amas. Amar Abaya taught. Bein agala agala kimelo orech agala. The way they arranged the wagons were for there to be the full space of the wagon between the wagon. Bakama oirech agala, how wide, how long was the wagon? Chamish amos, also 5 amos. So the Gemara says, Lamali, who needs a 5 amma length? The Gemara answer is simple. I'm sorry, the Gemara says, Ba'arba upal gasagi. Remember, the wagons were engineered to serve it and allow the transportation of the crushim. And based on our understanding previously about how how the beams were organized on the wagons only needed to be arba upalga sagi, 4.5 amas. Why? Rashi explains, if you align them on their wider angle, then all you'll have is 3 piles. And 3 times 1.5 equals 4.5. But if you'll stack them on their narrow side, you can only have 4 stacks. Long story short, no matter how you lay out the beams, you should not need 5 amas. And we can imagine that the wider the wagon is, the harder it is to navigate. And so you might want to have a more streamlined wagon. And the Gemara answers, Kihechi, to avoid the crushing of the crushim. We don't want the crushim to be crushed. The Gemara shows us how the crushim were aligned, were standing behind the wagons. 10 amma wagons were spread across the wagon. If you have 10 amas, then in the middle, that's 5. And you assume around here, it should be 2.5. So 2.5 plus 2.5, we have 5 amas, precisely the amount of space that was needed. The Gemara then games out, and we just said it verbally, but we can take a look. If you have 3 stacks of each 1.5, well, then all you need.
If the rings are going to get in the way.
What?
rings are gonna get away from making a nice neat
So that's
pile.
the
'cause
Gemara's answer. That's the Gemara's answer. So hypothetically, no, not hypothetically, in Mitzias, in reality, it was
where the
aligned.
plug- But it's gonna have more weight on one side. It's gonna be a little lopsided.
Why would there be more weight on one side than the other?
You have it balanced end to end, but where the plug is carved out, there's less
I
weight.
hear you. I hear you. I hear you. That's interesting. I don't think the Gemara actually considers that. All right, we'll go back here in a moment. So, we don't want the crushing to be absolutely crushed. You wouldn't want a crushed keresh. That would not be good. What kind of damage would happen?
Judging from the picture, it was an incredible load on those wagons. It is the
Yes.
weight of the crushing was tremendous. So what kind of suspension the technology could provide to drag all this weight over bumps of the desert? It's amazing.
I don't know, but it's a very fair point. It would have been quite a load. It would have been quite a load.
I wonder why the Gemara doesn't describe the construction of the wagons.
The Gemara described in passing if it was a complete bed or just had posts. We talk about the dimensions, but it is fair to say that we haven't yet
The
discussed
design is
all
incredible.
aspects. But the Gemara is going to continue.
There's another practical question. They weren't exactly on paved roads,
That's what the professor is saying.
That's the point.
in addition to everything else.
Yeah.
That's the point. There are 2 points. One
So hold on.
is,
I want
is
to
the weight of
ask.
the load, and another is the stability of the load that is on an even surface. They might just tilt.
This might be the
significantly.
explanation for a well-known medrash. Just give me 1 second.
It's not exactly the Florida Turnpike.
Exactly. So there should be some ropes around the crushing or some other means to keep them on the wagon. It's
So
a very
we are-
unstable construction.
I
We
mean,
are going to-
even if you remember the Aaron by the Plishtim with David HaMelech, when they sent it back, just the
Right.
Aaron itself needed 2 oxen to be pulled.
Right.
So
So
we're
it just
still.
goes to show the Aaron itself, how much it would, but I mean, it didn't seem like a big thing.
So
But
hold on,
even
hold on.
that-
First of all, we haven't finished the full discussion of the wagon. Now, I'm not telling you that you're going to leave entirely satisfied, but we do need to discuss a little more about the wagon. But I do want to tell you there's a famous medrash, and the medrash may in part be coming to answer our question. The medrash describes how the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, surrounded the Jewish people, and it had a number of functions. It protected them from enemy projectiles. It helped manage their rebel. You're muted, but hold on, please stay muted just for a moment. The Ananei HaKavod assisted in managing their garments. The Ananei HaKavod also smoothed out the road and protected them from hazards that were frequent in the desert, scorpions, snakes, and the like. And so this medrash describes how they were practically riding on clouds, or at the very least, had a very smooth pathway upon which to ride, which was unnatural to exist in the desert. That could only be explained and can only have happened by virtue of the clouds of glory helping out. Now you're going to ask me, Rabbi, we've done surveys and we've taken planes and flown over the desert and we have no evidence of a roadway. Well, I'll tell you, 3,000 years, a lot of sand can shift. And they have a hard time finding cities that were built in Ecuador and in Mexico 600 years ago. So it's not a surprise that we would struggle to find the roadways. But be it as it may, it's possible that the Medrash in part is giving us a solution to our conundrum. How is it possible that these wagons could bear such a heavy load? I'm not saying that's the only answer, but we could certainly appreciate why the Medrash would be helpful in this context as well. Let's continue the Gemara. Amar Rava. I'm sorry, Rabbi, you wanted to say something. Please feel free to unmute.
No, that's fine. Once we go into an area of miracles or the cloud, it can answer any question.
Yeah. All right, Amar Rava further said, see the Agala, how much space was there on the side of the wagon? Rashi, Chalal Shabein Defanois Le'oifanim, the space between the walls of the wagon and the wheels, the Oivi Hadoifen, and the thickness of the wall, Oivi Hadoifen. So we're talking about all the space to the side. So the sides of the wagon, between the wagon and the wheel, and the thickness of the wheel were the full width of the wagon. I'm having trouble visualizing it, but
Well, if you remember, there are two pictures. One, the wheels were under, and one, the wheels were on the side. So this takes Rashi takes the option of the wheels over to the side.
It's not Rashi. It's what the Gemara. It's the Gemara itself.
So the Gemara
giving
is taking the option of the wheels protruding outside of the from the wheels, not directly underneath.
Correct. And this might be at least a partial help in the questions that we are asking. Again, I'm looking for a picture that is explicitly referencing our topic, but I'm not seeing it.
What would be interesting if somebody has the knowledge, does it make it easier or harder with the wheels under or on the side? I'm not too familiar with the engineering involved.
I have a feeling that for bearing weight, it's a challenge, but for dealing with the bumps on the road, it's probably easier the wider it is distributed.
Well, it also...
The professor's shaking his hand. I take that as a very big... so it helps distribute the weight more broadly. Although I guess you'd have to make sure that the axle is a very strong, firm to be able to...
You need four-wheel drive.
Right. So let's see. See the agala, agala. The sides of the wagons is like the width of the wagon. The wagon itself would be 2.5 amos. The sides of the wagon could be only an amma and a half. I'm going to read this right in the English. Rava says the area of the sides of the wagon, which means between the wagon and the wheel and the thickness of the wheel, would have been the same width as the wagon. What is the width of the wagon? 2.5 amos. Different than what we said previously. So, oh no, because we're talking about the length. The length was 5, but the width is 2.5. We're asked, what do I need to have? A 2.5 wide. A cubit and a half would be enough. Why? Why would that be enough?
Because it would...
So the Gemara says, hold on one second. So that the beams wouldn't teeter. So Professor asked a question about suspension. We're not quite getting that sophisticated, but we are alluding to this issue. The wagon was wider than it might have been intuitively because the beams were hanging over, but the wider it was, the less likely it is that the beams would be unstable upon that wagon. And therefore we provide greater width to the. So now let's go back to our pictures and see if the Gemara talks about this. So the beams ran across the narrow end. Until now, we were discussing how the length would hold it. Now we're looking at the back of the wagon. And we said that it's 2.5, although plausibly it could be less, but for purposes of suspension or managing the load, a wider wagon would do a better job. I'm sure those that are experts in the math of these things could do the equations and give us some more information. But suffice it to say, this is what we're portraying right over here. Bill, can you give me another 5 minutes?
Yeah, 2.5 is enough.
I'm sorry. Okay. So just give me. We're towards the second half of the class over here. Rashi kihechi dilo lidadu krashim shelo yiyu hakrashim hamutolim la'arkan, so that the beams that were aligned therewith across their length, across the width of the wagon, midadin v'noitin lekano lekan, they shouldn't be shifting on both sides. Sh'imo shavot hakrashim katser, if the seat of the wagon is any narrower, Because they are so long, the yotzot lechutz harbeh, and they protrude over the bed of the wagon a lot. As the wagon moves, they would begin to shift and fall off. And so the Gemara does, to at least some extent, consider the engineering of the wagons. And this is actually very important because ultimately we are going to define the dimensions of a Rishus Harabim based on the wagons and their measures. Hold on, just bear with me a little. Yeah, Ella de Kaimalon. We know that Derech Rishus Harabim Sheish Esrei Amos, a road that's considered the public domain, has 16 amos. 16 amos. Anan, the Gamrin Allah. I'm sorry?
About 25 feet.
Anan, the Gamrin Mishkan. The Mishkan, Chames Rehave. The Mishkan was 15. The roadway of the Mishkan was 15 cubits wide, says Rav Steinsaltz. So the Gemara says, Amsa, Yisei Rahava, the Havakoi, Ben Levi, the Chimishtalfu, Kroshim Havanakim. Let's read Rav Steinsaltz again over here. With regards to the principle that we generally say a public domain is at least 16 amos wide, we derive it from the Mishkan. The problem is that we imagine it's only 15 cubits wide. How so? Two wagons were side by side. The width of the wagon plus the space between them and the space on the sides were 15. How so? You had 5 amos was the wagon and its wheels. The gap was 5 amos, and the next wagon is 5 amos. Measure across, and you've got precisely 15 amos. The Gemara says, no, there was an extra cubit because you're wondering how the beams didn't fall off. Well, I'll tell you how the beams didn't fall off. Because there was a human being standing on the side, keeping the beams in place. Lest they begin to shift or fall, he would fix it up. Rashi, Ben Levi, have a mishtalfi zumizu, lipo letoich, avir shebeneim, if it starts to fall, have a nokid lehu nichnas, lebein ha'avir amma, shebeneim. So there was an added 1 amma between the two wagons. And so the space would have been actually 5.5, or an extra amma between the two. He would always walk behind them. When they begin to shift, he would run into the pile, into the fray, and fix it up. And if you want to see a picture of this, so here. This is a portrayal of why it would be 15 amos. 10. Well, we don't look at the beams, we count the wagon. So the wagon is 5 amos, and between is 5 amos, and then the next thing is 5 amos. We add an extra amma. Well, here they say there was the lane. Okay, I thought it was in the middle, but okay. Half an amma on this side, half an amma on this side. Those aisles were there for the Levite who was escorting these wagons to keep the beams in place. What kind of insurance do you think, occupational insurance, do you think they had on the Mishkan for the Levites that were running alongside these wagons, catching the burden?
Rabbi.
Beryl, yes.
We could learn about all kinds of things not to do on Shabbos with the guys running along the wagon, with the guys on top of the wagon.
This is what happened to Levim who didn't know how to sing. They knew how to yell. They knew how to yell timber, and that's why they got assigned here.
You think they had horns or something like, like?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Hold on, let's see. We're not done yet. Maybe we are. Let's see what additional wisdom we have over here. One might ask, the width of 2 sets of krushim are 20 amos, and even a little more, because the agolas were 10 tvachim high. Krushim were more than 10 tvachim. Okay, this is a different question. Forget it. We've now concluded a Mishnah, a long Mishnah, the first Mishnah of chapter 11. So, my dear friends, we are now fluent in all matters of chapter 11. Anyways, the first Mishnah, an initial phase of the discussion about carrying, throwing, and transporting items from one domain to the other. We understand that many of the facts, many of the halachot of carrying and domains are born out of an analysis, a careful analysis of the Mishkan. And indeed, if you've ever heard that for a place to truly be a Rishus Harabim, it has to have 16 amas. Well, here is where you heard it first, right here. There's many more factors to be considered, but this is one of them. Let's start the Mishnah, and I'm just going to end a few minutes early. I have someone here that I've been waiting to meet. Baruch Hashem, we're celebrating.
Just a quick question about this.
Yes.
This Levi was able on his own to pick up and put back this heavy piece of lumber.
So I'll tell you my impression, reading Rashi carefully, it sounds like he would actually pick it up, but I suspect that he wasn't actually lifting it, but usually just there to shift or to support.
Back, right?
And that's at least how I'm imagining it, because I suspect it's a lot easier to stop an avalanche before it happens than to pull it back while it's already falling. But I will tell you that Rashi, the words Rashi uses do sound something to the effect of him actually catching him. Here, first, so he can kind of shift it before it's too late. Let's read the Mishnah, and then we're going to call it a day. Chulias Habor. The bank. It's appropriate, chapter 11, we're going to talk about the bank. The bank of a pit. And what we're describing here is that when you dig a hole, you got to do something with the earth. And so you might create a circular boundary of sorts around the hole by the fact that you're depositing the earth that's removed from the pit. So if that wall and the pit, or you have a boulder, shein gevoyim asara, that have a 10 tefach height, v'rochvan arba, with a width of 4 tvachim or more. Did I say 10 amas? I meant 10 tvachim. Hanoito mehen v'hanoisen al gabon. If you put something onto that stone or something onto that wall-like pile, chayiv, in effect, what you have done is moved an item from a public domain to a private domain. Pachas mikan, but if it is less than those dimensions, patur, you have not done an act of carrying on Shabbos. So you're going from a public domain to a mound, public domain to a rock. That can, under the right conditions, be an act of moving an item from a public to private domain. Rashi, what is a bank? Karka, chafiros, habor, the earth from the digging of a pit. Noistim sivivoisav, you place it all around. Lehakiv kimin chayma, to create a wall of sorts. Kimaisha anu noistim hekef eitzim even saviv piabar. Just as in general, we like to create a wall or a fence around a pit. So we are now transitioning to an entirely different discussion, a discussion of what constitutes a private domain, a public domain, and a whole lot more to be uncovered as we explore this brand new Mishnah, a journey in chapter 11 of Shabbos. And we are now at the bottom of 99a with Hashem's help. Hold on just a moment. With Hashem's help, tomorrow we'll do 99b. And before long, we'll celebrate our 100th page of Meseches Shabbos. Beryl,
Can I add a klutz kasha at the end? Are you
Go
allowed
ahead.
on Shabbos to measure something to see if you could then be able to do something?
Good question. Good question. Let's leave it as a question for now. You're asking how can one ascertain dimensions if that might also be an issue on Shabbos? I think the answer might be simple, but let's hold off for now. I want to close by mentioning Yisrael ben Mordechai, who today is the yahrzeit, and a prayerful wish for the good health, well-being of all the members of our Talmud Chabura, as well as prayerful wishes for the well-being of our Chabura's family, households, and good news for all of Kalal Yisrael. Thank you so much for making this class a meaningful, insightful, and special journey through the Talmud. Thank you all so much. We'll wish a mazel tov to Bill, who I'll be seeing in a moment, who today acquired a brand new pair of tefillin. And we wish him good health, happiness, and all good circumstances for him and all Klal Yisrael. Yes. Eli, you wanted to say something before we...
Yes, I do. A question regarding, you going to have a Sephardic minyan in the shul for the next week or no?
That's a question that would be best addressed without, privately, that we don't have to take up everyone else's
Okay,
time.
I apologize.
Um,
I apologize.
No worries, no worries. So please reach out so we can figure it out. Thank you.
Okay,
Have
definitely.
a
Thank you very much.
fantastic day,
Class
dear
was great.
friends. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Yom
Go
Tov.
ahead.